She heard a whisper through the storm, and what she found led her to an unforgettable miracle. The storm began just as the clock struck 9. I had been sitting by the window, a book in hand, though I barely read a page. The sky, once an inky blue, had darkened into a brooding gray, and the first drops of rain tapped against the glass. Soon, those taps turned to hammering, and the wind howled like a restless spirit outside. The house, an old Victorian relic that had been my grandmother's, creaked with every gust of wind. The beams groaned in protest, and the windows shivered in their frames. I always told myself I was fine here alone. I'd been living in this house for nearly a year since inheriting it, learning to coexist with its quirks and its creaks. But tonight was different. I leaned back, staring out at the storm. Lightning illuminated the woods that bordered the house, casting the trees into stark silhouettes. The branches looked like twisted fingers reaching for the heavens. Thunder followed a few seconds later, rolling through the air with an almost primal roar. I should have felt secure, but an unease prickled at my skin. My fingers toyed with the edge of the blanket draped over my lap as I tried to convince myself that the tension I felt was nothing more than my imagination, stirred by the storm. Then I heard it. At first, I thought it was the wind playing tricks on me. It was faint, barely more than a sigh. A whisper. "Sarah." I froze, my breath catching in my throat. My name. It had been my name, spoken softly yet unmistakably. My eyes darted around the room, but of course, I was alone. The house was empty except for me, or at least it was supposed to be. The whisper came again, clearer this time, and it sent a chill racing down my spine. "Sarah." It wasn't a voice I recognized. It wasn't my grandmother's. Her voice was warm and lilting, like a melody I'd grown up with. This voice was something else. Gentle, but urgent, like the speaker was trying to get my attention. I swallowed hard, my pulse quickening. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling. No answer. Just the relentless pounding of the rain and the occasional rumble of thunder. I shook my head, laughing nervously to myself. "It's the storm," I muttered, standing to close the curtains. But just as my fingers brushed the fabric, lightning illuminated the yard, and I saw something, or someone, a figure standing at the edge of the woods. My stomach twisted in fear. I blinked, but the next flash of lightning revealed nothing. Just the swaying trees and sheets of rain. Was my mind playing tricks on me? The storm could do that, couldn't it? It could turn shadows into shapes and wind into whispers. At least, that's what I told myself. But when I sat back down, I couldn't relax. My nerves were alight, every sound amplified, every shadow suspect. I strained to hear past the rain and wind, but the house felt unnervingly still. I hated that stillness more than the storm itself. It was the kind of silence that invited the imagination to run wild. The whisper came again, louder now. "Sara, come." The rational part of my mind screamed for me to stay put. Lock the doors, turn on every light, and wait for the storm to pass. But another part of me, a part one didn't fully understand, urged me to listen, to follow. I grabbed my flashlight from the kitchen drawer and threw on my coat. The storm hadn't lessened. If anything, the rain seemed angrier, as if it were trying to wash away the very ground. I hesitated at the door, hand hovering over the doorknob. This was crazy. Who goes out into a storm because of a whisper? But the pull was undeniable. I stepped outside, the rain immediately soaking through my clothes. The cold hit me like a slap, but I pushed forward, gripping the flashlight like a lifeline. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the path ahead. The whisper came again, guiding me toward the woods. The ground was a soggy mess, sucking in my boots with every step. My hair stuck to my face, and my breath came in short, sharp bursts. The woods loomed ahead, dark and foreboding. I'd always loved these trees in the daylight. They were peaceful, a retreat from the noise of the world. But at night, in the storm, they felt alive. Watching. Sarah, the whisper drew me closer. I crossed the threshold into the trees, the storm muffled slightly by the canopy overhead. The flashlight flickered, making me curse under my breath. The battery was fresh. It shouldn't be acting up. Still, I pressed on, the beam of light cutting through the shadows. The woods seemed different somehow. I'd explored them countless times growing up, but now they felt unfamiliar. The paths I knew by heart twisted and turned in ways that didn't make sense. Trees I didn't recognize rose up around me, their branches clawing at the sky. And then I saw it, a clearing ahead. The whisper fell silent, but I knew this was where it had been leading me. My flashlight flickered again, then went out entirely, plunging me into darkness. I fumbled with it, slapping it against my palm, but it was no use. Lightning flashed, illuminating the clearing. My heart stopped. In the center of the space stood a figure cloaked in shadow, unmoving. I froze, every muscle in my body screaming to run. But my legs refused to obey. The figure didn't move, didn't speak. It was simply there, as though it had been waiting for me. Who are you? My voice cracked, barely audible over the rain. The figure didn't respond. Another flash of lightning lit up the clearing, and this time, the figure was gone. My breath hitched. I spun around, searching for any sign of movement, but the woods were empty. Empty, except for the whisper. "You need to find it, Sarah," the voice said, as clear as if someone had been standing right beside me. "It's waiting." I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a root. My heart pounded in my ears, drowning out the storm. What was waiting? What was I supposed to find? The whisper didn't answer. It faded into the sound of the rain, leaving me alone in the clearing. After what felt like an eternity, I forced my legs to move, retreating the way I'd come. By the time I made it back to the house, I was drenched and shaking. I locked the door behind me, leaning against it as I tried to catch my breath. The storm raged on, but the house felt too quiet, like the air itself was holding its breath. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd been chosen for something, that the whisper, the storm, the figure, they were all part of something bigger, something I didn't yet understand, and I wasn't sure I wanted to. The storm had left its mark on the world by the time I woke the next morning. The air was heavy with the scent of rain-soaked earth, and the house seemed eerily quiet. Every creak of the old wooden floors felt magnified, as though the silence itself was alive, waiting for something. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the cold cup of coffee in front of me. My thoughts were a chaotic mess, looping back to the events of the previous night. The whisper, the figure, the clearing, it all felt like a dream. But the mud on my boots and the damp jacket hung by the door told me otherwise. I couldn't ignore it. Something or someone had called to me, and though every rational part of me wanted to dismiss it as imagination, a deeper part of me knew there was more. I couldn't let it go. The journal lay open on the table, its leather cover worn and soft from years of use. I'd found it just after returning from the woods, tucked away in an old chest in the attic. It had belonged to my grandmother, a woman I'd always seen as sensible, grounded. But the pages told a different story, one of mysteries and secrets she kept hidden. One entry stood out, written in her careful, looping handwriting. "The whisper leads to the light." What whisper? What light? The questions burned in my mind, refusing to be silenced. The journal mentioned a hidden place deep in the woods, marked by an ancient tree. My grandmother had described it as a place of power, a place where answers could be found. Answers to what? I wasn't sure, but I knew I had to find out. By midday, the sky was a pale, washed-out gray, the kind that made you feel like the world had been stripped of color. I packed a small bag with essentials, a flashlight, water, the journal, and my phone before stepping outside. The air was cool and damp, the remnants of the storm lingering in the soft squelch of mud beneath my boots. The woods loomed ahead, dark and quiet. I'd grown up playing among these trees, but they'd never felt like this. They were alive in a way I couldn't quite describe, their gnarled branches twisting toward the sky as if reaching for something unseen. I hesitated at the edge, the weight of the journal in my bag like an anchor pulling me back. "This is ridiculous," I muttered to myself. But the whisper from the night before still echoed in my mind. I couldn't ignore it. Taking a deep breath, I stepped into the trees. The forest was a maze of shadows and light, the canopy above filtering the weak sunlight into scattered beams. My boots crunched on fallen leaves and twigs, the sound unnervingly loud in the otherwise silent woods. Even the birds seemed to have gone still, their songs replaced by the distant rustle of leaves in the breeze. I followed the descriptions in the journal, though they were frustratingly vague. My grandmother had written about landmarks, a stream, a fallen log, a grove of birch trees, but time had a way of erasing such markers. The path I walked was unfamiliar, twisting and turning in ways that made me question if I was going in circles. Every so often, I'd stop and listen, hoping for some kind of sign. The whisper hadn't returned, and its absence gnawed at me. Was I wrong to come here? Was I chasing something that didn't exist? Just as doubt began to creep in, I saw it, a flash of movement in the corner of my vision. My head snapped toward it, but there was nothing, just the trees swaying gently in the wind. My heart raced as I turned in a slow circle, scanning the woods for any sign of life. "Hello!" I called out, my voice trembling slightly. No answer. But then, faint and distant, I heard the sound of water, a stream. My grandmother's notes had mentioned one. With renewed purpose, I headed toward the sound, the ground sloping downward as the trees grew thicker. The stream was narrow but fast-moving, its water clear and cold. It cut through the woods like a ribbon, its banks lined with smooth stones and moss. I paused at its edge, consulting the journal. My grandmother had written about crossing the stream, but the details were frustratingly sparse. I scanned the opposite bank, searching for any sign of a trail. That's when I saw it, a faint path winding up the hill, partially obscured by undergrowth. It wasn't much, but it was something. I waded across the stream, the icy water soaking through my boots and chilling my feet. The path was steeper than I'd expected, and the climb left me breathless. The trees thinned as I ascended, revealing patches of open sky. At the top, I found myself in another clearing. My pulse quickened. The tree stood at the center, exactly as my grandmother had described. It was ancient, its trunk massive and gnarled, its roots twisting out of the ground like the veins of some giant creature. Symbols were carved into its bark, intricate designs that seemed to pulse with an energy I could feel but not explain. I approached slowly, the journal clutched tightly in my hands. This was it, the place my grandmother had written about. But what was I supposed to do? The journal didn't say. I reached out, my fingers brushing against the rough bark. The air around me seemed to shift, growing heavier, charged. I pulled my hand back, heart pounding, and then I heard it, the whisper. "Sarah," it was clearer than ever, as though someone were standing right behind me. I spun around, but the clearing was empty. The whisper came again, softer this time. "Dig." I hesitated, my gaze falling to the ground beneath the tree. The earth looked undisturbed, covered in moss and fallen leaves. But the whisper was insistent. Dig! I dropped to my knees, using my hands to claw at the dirt. The soil was damp and loose, giving way easily. My fingers hit something hard, and my breath caught. I cleared away the dirt, revealing a small wooden box. It was simple, unadorned, and locked with a rusty clasp. My hands trembled as I pried it open. Inside was a locket, its golden surface etched with the same symbols carved into the tree. The moment I touched it, a warmth spread through me, radiating from my chest to the tips of my fingers. The air around me seemed to hum with energy. I turned the locket over in my hand, examining it. There was an inscription on the back. The light is within. Before I could make sense of it, the whisper spoke again, louder this time. You're close. Follow the light. A beam of sunlight broke through the clouds, illuminating the locket in my hand. My chest tightened with emotion, fear, awe, and something I couldn't quite name. Whatever this was, it wasn't over. It was just beginning. I held the locket in my hand, its golden surface glinting in the weak sunlight filtering through the trees. The symbols engraved on it were mesmerizing, their patterns intricate and unfamiliar. My pulse raced as I turned it over in my fingers, the weight of its mystery pressing down on me. The words on the back, "The light is within," felt like they were meant for me, though I couldn't yet understand why. I sat beneath the ancient tree, my knees damp from the earth, and pulled out my grandmother's journal from my bag. There had to be something in there, some clue that would help me make sense of this. I flipped through the pages, my fingers trembling. The journal was filled with sketches, diagrams, and notes scrawled in her elegant handwriting. Most of it I didn't understand. Strange symbols, references to the energy of the earth, and mentions of something she called the guide. It was like reading a puzzle, each piece incomplete without the others. But then I found it. One entry, written near the beginning of the journal, seemed to jump out at me. The whisper leads to the light. The locket is the key. It reveals what the eye cannot see, what the heart refuses to believe. The light is within, but only for those who are ready to follow. I stared at the words, my breath catching in my throat. My grandmother had known about the locket. She'd written about it. But what did she mean by the "I cannot see" or "the heart refuses to believe"? It felt like a riddle, one I wasn't sure I was equipped to solve. The woods had grown quieter as the afternoon wore on, the wind settling into a gentle rustle that whispered through the leaves. I glanced around the clearing, the locket still clutched in my hand. The tree loomed above me, its carved symbols seeming to shift in the dappled sunlight. I held the locket up to the tree, wondering if it would react, if the symbols on its surface would align with those on the bark. But nothing happened. Frustrated, I sat back and opened the locket. Inside was a photograph, small and slightly faded, but still clear. It was my grandmother. Her smile was radiant, her eyes bright with an energy I'd never seen in the woman I'd known. She looked younger in the photo, vibrant in a way that seemed almost otherworldly. Next to the photo was a small slip of paper, folded tightly. I unfolded it carefully, my heart racing. The note read, "If you found this, Sarah, then you're ready. Trust the whisper. Trust yourself. The light will guide you." I felt tears sting my eyes as I read her words. She had written this for me, knowing I would find it one day. But what did she mean by the light? And why did she trust me to figure it out? My chest tightened with a mix of grief and determination. My grandmother had always been a quiet force in my life, someone who seemed to know things without ever explaining how. I thought her wisdom was just the product of age and experience, but now I realized there was more to her than I'd ever understood. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows through the woods, I gathered my things and made my way back to the house. The locket felt warm against my chest, where I'd fastened it around my neck. Each step felt heavy, my mind racing with questions and possibilities. By the time I reached the house, the air was cool and still. I set my bag down on the kitchen table and sat with the journal, flipping through its pages again. There was so much I hadn't noticed before, so many details that now seemed to take on new meaning. One page in particular caught my attention. It was a sketch of the tree I'd just visited, its branches sprawling across the page. Beneath the sketch, my grandmother had written, "The tree holds the memory of the earth. It is a conduit, a bridge between what is seen and what is unseen. The key will unlock its secrets." The words sent a shiver down my spine. The memory of the earth? A bridge between the seen and unseen? It sounded impossible, like something out of a fantasy novel. And yet I couldn't deny the pull I felt, the sense that this was real, that it was happening. I ran my fingers over the sketch, tracing the lines of the tree's roots. Something about them seemed familiar, but I couldn't quite place it. Then it hit me, the symbols carved into the tree. They weren't just random designs. They were part of a larger pattern, one that matched the symbols on the locket. My heart pounded as I grabbed the locket and compared its markings to the sketch. They aligned perfectly, each curve and angle matching the symbols drawn on the tree. My grandmother had known. She had understood something I was only beginning to grasp. Night fell as I sat at the table, the journal spread out before me, the locket warm against my chest. The house was quiet, the only sound the occasional creak of the old wooden beams. I felt a strange sense of calm, as though the storm had taken with it the tension that had gripped me the night before. But there was still so much I didn't understand. The locket, the tree, the whisper. What did it all mean? And what was I supposed to do next? I picked up the journal, flipping to the last few pages. They were different from the others, the handwriting more hurried, almost frantic. My grandmother had written about the guide again, describing it as a presence that leads, a force that cannot be seen but must be trusted. I leaned back in my chair, my thoughts swirling. The guide. Was that the whisper? Was that what had called me into the woods? The thought both comforted and terrified me. I had followed the whisper once, and it had led me to the locket. But where would it lead me next? Before I could overthink it, I grabbed the locket and stood. If there was one thing my grandmother had made clear, it was that the answers wouldn't come from sitting and waiting. I needed to act, to trust the whisper and follow wherever it led. The night stretched out before me, full of unknowns. But I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. I was ready. The night was quiet, but my heart was anything but. Each beat echoed in my chest, loud and insistent, as though it were trying to drown out the doubts in my mind. The locket around my neck felt heavier with every step I took into the woods. It was strange how something so small could feel so powerful. The air had a stillness that wasn't natural. It wasn't just the absence of sound. It was the weight of it, like the world was holding its breath. The trees cast long shadows in the moonlight, their gnarled branches reaching across the path like skeletal fingers. But I didn't feel fear. Not really. I felt expectant. My grandmother's words replayed in my mind, the ones she'd written in the journal. The tree holds the memory of the earth. It is a conduit, a bridge between what is seen and what is unseen. The key will unlock its secrets. The key. The locket. I reached up, my fingers brushing against its warm surface. It felt alive, pulsing faintly as though it shared my heartbeat. I wasn't sure what I was walking toward, but I knew I couldn't stop now. The whisper hadn't returned, but its absence didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like a test. The path twisted and turned, leading me deeper into the forest than I'd ever ventured before. The journal had mentioned a hidden place, a sacred space marked by an ancient tree. I hadn't been sure what that meant until now. The trees around me grew larger, their trunks wider, their roots snaking across the ground in massive tangles. These trees were old, older than the house, older than the stories my grandmother used to tell me about the woods. I paused at the top of a small hill, catching my breath. The air here was different, cooler, almost electric. My flashlight illuminated the path ahead, the beam cutting through the darkness to reveal a grove of birch trees. Their white trunks glowed faintly in the moonlight, their leaves rustling softly in a breeze I couldn't feel. The grove wasn't in the journal, but something about it felt right. I stepped forward, the crunch of leaves under my boots the only sound in the stillness. The trees seemed to part from me, their branches arching overhead like a cathedral. And then I saw it. The ancient tree stood at the center of the grove, its massive trunk covered in the same symbols I'd seen before. They glowed faintly, a soft, golden light pulsing in time with the locket's warmth against my chest. The roots of the tree spread out in every direction, disappearing into the earth like veins. I approached slowly, the locket in my hand. The air around the tree felt charged, as though it were alive, breathing. My heart pounded as I reached out, my fingers brushing against the bark. It was warm, almost as if it were responding to my touch. The journal had mentioned that the tree held secrets, memories of the earth, my grandmother had called them. But how was I supposed to access them? I glanced at the locket, its golden surface glowing faintly in the dim light. The symbols on it matched the ones on the tree perfectly, as though they were pieces of the same puzzle. I held the locket up to the tree, aligning the symbols. For a moment, nothing happened. I felt a pang of disappointment, my shoulders sagging. Maybe I'd misunderstood. Maybe this wasn't the right place. But then the ground beneath me trembled, a low vibration that hummed through my feet and into my chest. The symbols on the tree began to glow brighter, their light spilling out across the grove in rippling waves. The locket grew warmer in my hand, its pulse quickening until it felt like a second heartbeat. The whisper returned. "Sarah." The voice was soft but insistent, cutting through the hum of the tree's energy. "Place the locket." I hesitated, unsure of what would happen, but something deep inside me, the part of me that had followed the whisper this far, knew I could trust it. I reached up, pressing the locket into a hollow in the tree's bark. It fit perfectly, clicking into place like a missing puzzle piece. The grove exploded with light. The world around me transformed. The forest dissolved, replaced by a landscape I couldn't comprehend. Colors I'd never seen before swirled around me, vivid and alive. The air shimmered with energy, and the ground beneath me felt both solid and fluid, like walking on light itself. I wasn't afraid. If anything, I felt connected, like I was part of something vast and ancient, something that had been waiting for me to find it. The whisper spoke again, clearer this time. "You've opened the door, Sarah. The light is within you." The words resonated in my chest, their truth undeniable. I looked down at my hands, which glowed faintly, the same golden light as the tree's symbols. I felt powerful, not in a way that was overwhelming, but in a way that was grounding, comforting. "What is this place?" I asked, my voice trembling. The whisper didn't answer directly. Instead, images began to form around me. Memories not my own, but familiar nonetheless. I saw my grandmother as a young woman, standing in the same grove, her face alight with wonder. I saw her holding the locket, her fingers tracing its symbols as she whispered words I couldn't hear. The images shifted, showing her writing in the journal, her expression focused and serene. And then they changed again, showing me I was younger, sitting at my grandmother's feet as she told me stories about the woods, about the magic hidden in the world if you knew where to look. Tears blurred my vision as the images faded, leaving me alone in the shimmering light. The whisper returned, softer this time. The light is within you, Sarah. You are the guide now. The word struck me like a lightning bolt. The guide. My grandmother had written about it in the journal, describing it as a force that cannot be seen but must be trusted. It wasn't just something external. It was me. The grove returned, the light fading until the forest was as it had been before. The locket rested in the tree's hollow, its glow dimming to a soft warmth. I reached for it, slipping it back around my neck. It no longer felt heavy. It felt like it belonged there. I stood for a long moment, staring at the tree. The symbols on its bark no longer glowed, but their presence felt just as powerful. I didn't have all the answers. I wasn't sure I ever would, but I felt a deep sense of peace. The kind that comes from knowing you're exactly where you're meant to be. As I made my way back through the woods, the whisper stayed with me, not as a voice, but as a feeling. A quiet, steady assurance that I was part of something greater, that I carried the light within me. And for the first time in a long time, I felt whole. When I stepped back into the house, the stillness inside felt different. It wasn't the heavy, unsettling quiet of the night before. This quiet felt peaceful, like the air had been waiting for my return. The weight of the locket against my chest was a steady reminder of the journey I had just taken, a journey that had changed me in ways I was only beginning to understand. I placed my bag on the kitchen table and slid into a chair, staring at the journal in front of me. The words written by my grandmother now carried a gravity they hadn't before. They weren't just the musings of an eccentric woman. They were a guide, a map to something far greater than either of us. The whisper still lingered in my mind, its final words echoing. You are the guide now. I touched the locket, feeling its warmth beneath my fingertips. The phrase engraved on its back, "The light is within," had taken on a deeper meaning. The light wasn't just some abstract force. It was something alive, something I could feel pulsing within me. But what did it mean to be a guide? And why me? I spent the rest of the night poring over the journal, searching for answers. My grandmother had left behind more than just notes and sketches. She'd left pieces of herself, fragments of her life that I was only now beginning to understand. Her words painted a picture of someone who had discovered a connection to the world that went beyond the physical, someone who had found meaning in the unseen. One passage stood out. The light is a gift, but it is also a responsibility. To carry it is to open yourself to the world, to feel its pain and its beauty in equal measure. The guide is not chosen at random. The light finds those who are ready, even if they do not yet know it themselves. I read the passage over and over, the weight of her words settling in my chest. The light had found her, and now it had found me. But was I ready? I didn't feel like someone destined for anything extraordinary. I was just Sarah, a woman trying to piece together the fragments of her life in a house full of memories. But the light didn't seem to care about my doubts. It pulsed gently within me, a quiet reassurance that I couldn't ignore. By morning, I had made a decision. If my grandmother had been able to carry this responsibility, then I could too. I didn't know exactly what it would entail, but I knew where I needed to start with the locket. It wasn't just a symbol. It was a key, a connection to something much larger than myself. I stepped outside, the morning light casting the woods in a soft, golden glow. The storm had washed away the grime of the world, leaving everything fresh and new. The air was crisp, the kind that filled your lungs and made you feel alive. The locket felt warm against my skin, as though it were guiding me. The whispers had faded, replaced by an inner pull that led me back toward the ancient tree. I wasn't sure what I expected to find, but I knew I had to follow. The woods felt different in the daylight, less intimidating and more alive. The path that had seemed so foreboding the night before now felt welcoming, as though the trees themselves were urging me forward. I reached the grove quickly, the sight of the ancient tree filling me with a strange mix of awe and familiarity. The tree stood as it had before, its massive trunk covered in symbols that no longer glowed but still radiated a quiet power. I approached it slowly, my hand brushing against the bark. The energy I'd felt the night before was still there, humming beneath the surface. As I stood there, I realized something. The light wasn't just within me. It was everywhere, woven into the fabric of the world, into the roots of the tree, the soil beneath my feet, the very air I was breathing. My grandmother had known this. She had written about it in the journal, though I hadn't fully understood her words until now. I closed my eyes, letting myself sink into the moment. The light within me seemed to reach out, connecting with the energy of the tree, the grove, the earth itself. It wasn't something I could see or touch, but I could feel it, as real as the ground beneath me. When I opened my eyes, the grove had changed. The air shimmered with a soft, golden glow, the symbols on the tree glowing faintly once more. The locket grew warm against my chest, its pulse steady and strong. I reached up, placing my hand over it, and then I heard her voice. Sarah. It wasn't the whisper. It was my grandmother, clear and unmistakable. I turned, my breath catching in my throat. There she was, standing at the edge of the grove, her face lit with the same radiant smile I had seen in the photograph inside the locket. Grandma? My voice wavered, a mix of disbelief and hope. She nodded, her eyes soft and kind. You've found it, she said, her voice as warm as I remembered. I knew you would. Tears blurred my vision as I took a step toward her. I don't understand, I said. What is this? Why me? Her smile deepened. The light doesn't choose randomly, she said. It finds those who are ready, even if they don't believe they are. You were always meant to carry it, Sarah. Just as I was. I shook my head, the weight of her words pressing against me. But I don't know how. I don't know what to do. You already do, she said. The light is within you. It will guide you, just as it guided me. Trust it and trust yourself. I wanted to say more, to ask her 1,000 questions, but her image began to fade, the glow around her softening. Wait, I cried, reaching out. Don't go. Her voice lingered even as she disappeared. You are ready, Sarah. The miracle is within you. The grove returned to its natural state, the glow fading until it was just a quiet patch of forest once more. I stood there, my heart aching with a mix of loss and gratitude. My grandmother was gone, but she had left me with something far greater than answers. She had left me with belief in myself, in the light, in the connection that tied us all together. As I made my way back to the house, the locket's warmth against my chest was a steady reminder of what I had found. The miracle wasn't something external, something waiting to be discovered. It was inside me, a light that could never be extinguished. And for the first time, I understood what it meant to truly see. The walk back to the house felt surreal, as though the air around me was heavier with meaning. Every step seemed to carry a weight I couldn't quite explain, a blend of awe and responsibility. My grandmother's voice lingered in my mind, her final words reverberating through me. You are ready, Sarah. The miracle is within you. Ready for what? I didn't know, but I felt it, the quiet certainty that she was right. The light was within me. It had always been there, waiting for me to realize it. I glanced down at the locket resting against my chest, its warmth a steady reminder of the journey I had taken to get here. When I reached the house, the sky was a canvas of soft blues and pinks, the first light of dawn spilling over the horizon. The house looked different now, less imposing and more like a part of the world I'd just discovered. Its familiar creaks and groans as I opened the door felt almost welcoming, as though the house itself had been waiting for me to return. I stepped into the kitchen and set my bag on the table. The journal, worn and weathered, was still open to the passage I'd been reading before I left. The guide is not chosen at random. The light finds those who are ready, even if they do not yet know it themselves. The words felt different now. They weren't just abstract ideas. They were real, a part of me. I sat down, staring at the journal, my thoughts swirling. The responsibility my grandmother had carried now rested with me. It was a daunting thought, but it didn't feel overwhelming. It felt right. I picked up the locket, tracing my fingers over the engraved symbols. They were no longer just decorations. They were keys, markers of a connection far greater than anything I could fully comprehend. I thought about the grove, the ancient tree, the golden light that had filled the space. It was a place I would never forget, not just because of what I had seen, but because of what I had felt. As the morning light grew brighter, I made myself a cup of tea, letting its warmth anchor me. My grandmother's presence still lingered, not as a ghost or a memory, but as a feeling, a steady, guiding force. I wondered how long she had carried the light, how much of her life had been shaped by the same responsibilities I now faced. Her journal held some answers, but I realized it was only a starting point. There was so much more to uncover, so much more to learn. The locket felt like a living thing against my chest, its warmth a constant reminder that the journey wasn't over. If anything, it was just beginning. I opened the journal to the last entry, one I hadn't noticed before. It was written in a different hand, not my grandmother's, but someone else's, though the style was equally elegant. The words sent a shiver through me. To carry the light is to see the world as it truly is, not as it appears, but as it exists in its infinite connections. Trust yourself, and you will find the path. You are not alone. The message was signed with a single initial, A. I stared at the page, my mind racing. Who was A? Someone who had come before my grandmother? Another guide? The idea thrilled me and terrified me. If this was something passed down, how far back did it go? And how many others had walked this path? The day unfolded slowly, the hours stretching out in a peaceful rhythm. I stayed in the house, letting the weight of the experience settle. The locket never left my chest, its presence grounding me as I pieced together everything I'd learned. My grandmother's voice echoed in my thoughts, a steady reassurance that I was exactly where I needed to be. By mid-afternoon, I couldn't resist the pull of the woods. I grabbed the journal and stepped outside, the locket glowing faintly in the sunlight. The path to the grove was becoming familiar now, each turn and twist etched into my memory. The air was cool, the scent of rain still lingering from the storm. When I reached the grove, I paused at the edge, letting the sight of the ancient tree fill me with a quiet awe. The symbols on its bark didn't glow in the daylight, but they still radiated a subtle energy. The tree felt alive, more than just wood and leaves. It felt like a guardian, a keeper of secrets. I approached slowly, the journal in one hand and the locket resting against my chest. The grove was silent, the kind of silence that wasn't empty but full, alive with the hum of the unseen. I knelt at the base of the tree, my fingers brushing against the rough bark. "Grandma," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I wish I could talk to you again. I wish I could ask you so many things." The whisper didn't return, but I didn't feel alone. The air around me seemed to shift, the light filtering through the trees growing softer, more golden. It was as though the grove itself was answering, its presence wrapping around me like a warm embrace. I opened the journal, flipping to the sketches my grandmother had drawn of the tree. They were intricate, every detail captured with care. I ran my fingers over the page, marveling at how much she had known, how much she had left for me to discover. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the grove. I realized something. The miracle wasn't just the light or the locket or the tree. The miracle was the connection, the invisible thread that tied me to my grandmother, to the grove, to the world around me. It was the way the light had always been there, waiting for me to see it. I stood, the journal tucked under my arm, and looked back at the tree one last time before heading home. The walk felt lighter now, each step filled with a quiet confidence I hadn't felt before. The path was no longer just a path. It was a bridge, a connection to something greater. That night, as I sat by the window, the locket warm against my chest, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known was possible. The storm that had once raged inside me was gone, replaced by the steady light of something infinite. I didn't have all the answers, but I didn't need them. I had the light, the journal, and the memory of my grandmother's voice. And I knew, without a doubt, that I would carry the miracle with me forever. Unforgettable,